This young woman was a devoted fan of the K-pop group BTS. The geographical distance separating her from her idols wasn't vast. Tragically, however, they existed on the other side of a heavily fortified border. For she was a citizen of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea. For her, South Korea was a promised land, a dream shared by many young women her age. After joining the military, she realized the hope for reunification between North and South seemed to be fading. But in 2025, a ceasefire was declared. A joint economic zone, utilizing a shared currency, was established between the two nations. This allowed citizens from both sides to move freely within the zone. So, immediately after completing her military service, the young woman decided to leave her homeland for the South. It held the promise of dreams and things she had never seen. But like other undocumented workers, she soon fell prey to the exploitative practices of ruthless capitalists. Disillusionment set in as she witnessed South Korean girls scavenging for leftovers beside overflowing bins just to survive in their own country. To stay alive, she resorted to selling her body in bars, catering to the desires of men. However, most of the money she earned ended up in the pockets of the gangster who ran the establishment. One night, she witnessed a fellow waitress brutally beaten. She spoke out, only to be knocked to the ground by the boss. She fought back, seizing his gun in self-defense. He assumed she didn't know how to use it, but she was surprisingly proficient with firearms. As he advanced, grabbing her throat to throw her down, the barrel of the gun found its place against his neck. Bang! She swiftly dealt with his two remaining henchmen, then told her friend to grab all the gangster's money and run. For a year, she lived in hiding, a wanted fugitive. Feeling cornered, with no place for a defector like her in this society, she contemplated ending her life with a stolen gun. But then, a glimmer of hope appeared. A bespectacled man approached her, saying, "If you're going to throw your life away, give it to me." This man was known as the Professor. He had assembled a team of exceptional individuals from both North and South Korea, forming an extraordinary crew. Each member of the gang was given a code name based on major world cities. The young woman was dubbed Tokyo. Every member possessed unique skills and talents. A brilliant young hacker was called Rio. A streetwise brawler with impressive boxing skills was Denver. His father, a seasoned miner, was Moscow. A seductive con artist was Nairobi. A pair of imposing brutes, seasoned mercenaries, were Oslo and Helsinki. The final key was Berlin, a notorious escape artist from North Korea. They were planning a heist, targeting a staggering $4 trillion. There was only one place with that kind of money: the Joint Mint, the very institution printing the shared currency for the joint economic zone between South and North Korea. The director of the mint was a lecherous South Korean man. Despite being married, he was having a secret affair with a North Korean employee named My Son. He promised her he would divorce his wife and be with her, even pledging to secure citizenship for her family in the North. Because of this, she was completely subservient to him. Berlin drove a bus loaded with his team and a vast arsenal of sophisticated weaponry. Wearing masks and ready for action, they approached the mint. A police escort accompanied a container truck carrying paper for the mint's printing operations. As the convoy reached a dam, they encountered a roadblock. Below the dam, the gang members were scaling the structure using ropes. Rio, the hacker, disabled the police communication systems, cutting them off from their base. From the bus, the masked figures descended, firing warning shots into the air to intimidate the police officers. The gang systematically neutralized the officers, changing into their uniforms and locking them inside the container truck. They then drove the truck, disguised as the escort, into the mint. Inside, a group of high school students were on a field trip. Among them was a crucial target for the gang. As the robbers entered the mint, Rio hacked into the security system, legitimizing Berlin's identity. With all credentials seemingly verified, security allowed them entry. The professor observed and directed the operation from the outside. Tokyo and Nairobi, wearing wigs and posing as business partners, gained access to the inner workings of the mint. When their weapons were discovered, they brandished their guns, threatening and subduing the guards. They fired warning shots to control the situation. At that moment, their accomplices emerged from the container, swiftly overpowering the mint employees. Tokyo searched frantically for the crucial student but couldn't find her. Finally, she located the girl hiding in a restroom. It turned out she was the daughter of the US ambassador, a vital pawn in their plan. The gang quickly gathered everyone inside the mint and took them hostage, blindfolding them and confiscating their phones. Inside the vault, Rio and Moscow worked together to unlock the money storage. Upon successfully opening it, Denver and Rio gleefully jumped onto the piles of cash, reveling in the moment. They then began filling bags with money, informing the professor, "We're coming out now." They proceeded to activate all the mint's alarms and open the doors, preparing to exit. According to the professor's plan, they would confront the police, but were only to fire warning shots. Absolutely no one was to be injured or killed during the heist. The police mobilized their entire force to converge on the mint. Arriving at the scene, they were met by a group of masked individuals firing wildly into the air. The police responded with their own gunfire. While the police aimed directly at the robbers, the gang was under strict orders not to fire back. Then, Rio was hit. Unable to maintain the professor's directive any longer, the gang was forced to return fire, engaging in a direct shootout with the police. They used smoke grenades to obscure the police's vision, dragging Rio back inside the mint. Fortunately, the bullet had struck his bulletproof vest, leaving Rio unharmed. The gang was relieved that no lives had been lost. They then distributed identical red jumpsuits to all the hostages, matching their own attire. Rio set up audio and visual equipment to communicate with the professor outside. A secret cable connected the mint directly to the professor's location. The leaders of both nations dispatched their top personnel to the scene to resolve the hostage situation. South Korea sent their lead negotiator, Inspector Seon Woo-jin. North Korea sent Captain Cha. While the North Koreans wanted to storm the mint immediately, Inspector Woo-jin prioritized the safety of the hostages. The two sides clashed over the approach, but Inspector Woo-jin's argument prevailed. The safety of the hostages was paramount. She called the mint to negotiate with the robbers. Rio immediately patched the call through to the professor, whose voice was disguised using voice-changing software. Inspector Woo-jin tried to ascertain the mysterious professor's identity, but to no avail. She demanded the release of the high school students. The professor replied, "The four of us will consider your request," then hung up. Inspector Woo-jin became suspicious. Were there really only 4 robbers inside? Meanwhile, the chief commander and Captain Cha believed this information, preparing to storm the mint despite Woo-jin's warnings that it could be a trap. The chief commander dismissed her concerns and told her to go home and rest. Outside, she received a text from her boyfriend and drove to his coffee shop. The inspector was a single mother, battling her ex-husband, a politician, for custody of their child. Unbeknownst to her, her current lover was the professor she had just negotiated with. The professor had orchestrated their meeting, knowing South Korea would undoubtedly send her to handle the mint situation, given her reputation as the nation's top negotiator. The couple chatted casually, exchanging pleasantries. The professor learned that North Korea had taken control of the operation and planned an armed assault on the mint. As predicted, Captain Cha was mobilizing forces to storm the building. The professor immediately called the mint, alerting his team to prepare for action. The hacker, Rio, observed and identified the entrance the police were planning to use. The gang then immediately moved all the hostages to that precise location. The police began drilling a small hole in the door and inserted a camera probe to survey the inside. To their surprise, they saw numerous individuals dressed in red jumpsuits, wearing masks and brandishing weapons. At that exact moment, a video appeared on YouTube featuring 2 of the hostages. These hostages announced that the robbers and all the hostages were now wearing identical outfits, and even carried fake guns. The chief of police received a report that the young woman speaking on YouTube was the daughter of the American ambassador. Recognizing the extreme danger of an assault, Captain Cha immediately ordered a withdrawal. This was a masterful move by the professor. Now, if the police attacked, they wouldn't be able to distinguish between robbers and hostages. Furthermore, the presence of the American ambassador's daughter made a risky operation even more unfeasible. At this time, Inspector Woo-jin, while having a cordial conversation with the professor, received a call from her superior informing her that the raid had failed. She was ordered to return to the Royal Mint immediately. The inspector bid farewell to the professor and returned to the scene. The professor then immediately went inside and instructed his team to proceed with the next phase of the plan. It turned out that the gang's objective wasn't simply to steal money. Since there wasn't 4 trillion won readily available to steal, they were going to print it themselves. This would make it much more difficult for the police to investigate. The professor had meticulously planned and calculated everything. Inside the Royal Mint, the gang was directing the hostages to work tirelessly printing money. They would continue until they had produced the full 4 trillion won. The professor told Berlin, "Now, the most important thing is to manage the hostages, to ensure their cooperation. We absolutely cannot kill anyone." The group of hostages now worked in shifts in a very organized and disciplined manner. Inspector Wu Jin returned to the Royal Mint and announced to the press, "The safety of all the hostages is our top priority." After the failed raid the previous night, everyone was now following the inspector's orders. The inspector then called the professor to continue negotiations. While she inquired about the hostages' well-being, the professor continually deflected and asked her probing personal questions. The professor then warned, "If you attempt another armed assault, there will be serious consequences." He then abruptly hung up. The inspector told her colleagues, "Controlling nearly 50 hostages is extremely difficult. There are bound to be hostages who will try to escape. We must be patient. If an opportunity arises, we'll act immediately." Inside the Royal Mint, the task of printing money was entrusted to Nairobi, the master counterfeiter, due to her experience in forging documents on a large scale. Moscow and his son, Denver, were in charge of managing the hostages while simultaneously digging a tunnel to create an escape route. While the father and son stepped aside for a private conversation, the Mint director told his employee, "Now, we need to find a way to inform the police that the robbers are stalling for time to print money." He told his assistant manager to feign an injury to attract the attention of the father and son. Seizing the opportunity, he slipped away. The director made his way to the exhibition room. As he was leaving, Tokyo pointed a gun at his head. The director explained that he was only looking for a first aid kit because his employee was injured. Sensing unrest among the hostages, Berlin immediately gathered them for an ideological intervention. He ordered the North Korean hostages to stand on the right and the South Koreans on the left. From that point forward, if the South Koreans made a mistake, the North Koreans would be punished, and vice versa. "Now you must watch each other very closely if you don't want to be punished," Berlin declared. Tokyo strongly disagreed with Berlin's approach, as the professor had emphasized the importance of humane treatment to gain the hostages' trust. Tokyo, who always followed the professor's instructions meticulously, was also displeased. The American ambassador's daughter, displaying the most uncooperative attitude, was taken by Rio to a separate room for confinement. During lunch, the director called his mistress, "My son," aside for a private conversation. He instructed her to sneak into his office and retrieve his smartwatch from the drawer. He planned to use the watch to contact the police and inform them that the robbers were stalling to print money. Seeing her hesitation, he promised to divorce his wife and marry her as soon as they escaped. Denver, noticing their suspicious behavior, approached them to inquire. The director told Denver, "She's pregnant, so I'm just worried about her." Denver then escorted my son to the room where the ambassador's daughter was being held to rest. Suspecting something, the young woman questioned my son. The two then collaborated on a plan to retrieve the smartwatch from the director's office. Outside, Inspector Wu Jin instructed all personnel on the scene to turn off their mobile devices and communicate only via radio, as they needed to wait for a signal from the hostages inside the mint. All members of the press were also moved away from the scene to avoid signal interference. In the control room, the hacker, observing the two girls seemingly arguing, went to check on them. The ambassador's daughter said she needed to use the restroom. While Rio escorted her to the bathroom, my son slipped into the director's office to search for the smartwatch. In the restroom, the young woman cleverly stalled for time. Seeing Rio seemingly susceptible to her charms, she kissed him passionately. Taking advantage of his distraction, she grabbed his gun and pointed it at him. Rio challenged her. "Go ahead, shoot." She pulled the trigger, but the gun wouldn't fire. Rio instantly snatched the weapon back, disengaged the safety, and subdued her. Meanwhile, after searching for a while, my son found the director's smartwatch. As she turned it on, the police outside picked up the signal. Just as she was about to communicate with the police, Denver entered. My son claimed she was hungry and went to look for food. Denver offered her some food and was about to go warm up some milk, believing she was indeed pregnant. My son tried to activate the watch, but Denver returned. He grabbed her hand and asked, "Did that bastard hit you? What a scumbag." My son replied, "Actually, he's already married." Just then, Rio walked in, so Denver led my son out. At the police command post, everyone began to panic when they lost the signal from the smartwatch. Inspector Wu Jin was deeply concerned about the hostage with the watch. She immediately called the professor and pretended to ask about the hostages' phones. The professor confidently declared, "None of the hostages will be able to communicate with the outside world." Hearing this, Wu Jin knew that the robbers were still unaware of the watch. And its specialist suggested, "We can send a link to the watch. If the hostage clicks on it, we can observe everything happening inside." At that moment, Denver brought my son to the director to reprimand him for impregnating her while already having a wife and family. My son rushed to intervene and slipped the smartwatch into the director's pocket. The director, having retrieved the watch, looked for an excuse to go to the restroom. However, Denver followed him, saying, "Even if you go, you have to leave the door open. You look suspicious." Thus, the director was still unable to activate the watch. Meanwhile, the professor suddenly realized something was amiss in Inspector Wu Jin's words. He called the Royal Mint to check. Rio reported that nothing unusual had occurred. The professor then texted Wu Jin, inviting her to his place for a meal. Inspector Wu Jin, feeling famished and about to grab something to eat, received the professor's message. She immediately went to his cafe. "There," she told him, "it seems we're close to cracking this case." Hearing this, the professor was momentarily taken aback. Just then, Wu Jin received a call from a colleague, so the professor went inside, allowing her to speak freely. During the call, Wu Jin discussed the smartwatch inside the mint with her colleague. While talking, she looked in the mirror and noticed the professor eavesdropping at the doorway. When he came out, she asked, "Why were you eavesdropping on me?" At the same time, she produced her handcuffs. Thinking quickly, the professor replied, "I felt you weren't serious about our relationship. I suspected you were seeing someone else, so I had to listen to your phone call." Wu Jin, finding his explanation plausible, apologized and returned to the Royal Mint. Immediately afterward, the professor called Berlin, informing him that a hostage had a smartwatch and was trying to contact the police. Berlin gathered all the hostages. While he was lecturing them, the director, hiding behind my son, activated the watch and clicked on the link sent by the police. Now, the police outside could clearly see and hear everything happening inside. Berlin immediately called the director forward. The director handed the watch to my son and stepped forward. Berlin gave him a metal detector and ordered him to find the person with the watch. My son quickly hid the watch inside her shirt, obscuring it from the police's view. The director held the detector, while Berlin guided his hand over my son's body. When they reached her chest area, the device beeped. Berlin removed my son's jacket, but only found a necklace, so he dismissed it. Suddenly, the smartwatch fell to the ground from my son's person. Furious, Berlin immediately stomped on it, crushing it. In the control room, Inspector Wu Jin received a call from the professor. He coldly stated, "Your people are playing games again. I'll let this one slide. But if it happens again, you know the consequences." Wu Jin then discovered that before the watch was destroyed, it had recorded a short video. Inside the Royal Mint, Berlin flew into a rage and ordered Denver to execute my son. Rio, the hacker, intervened, reminding him of the professor's strict no-killing rule. "We need to make an example of her," Berlin argued, "to keep the other hostages in line." Denver hesitated. "She's pregnant," he said. Berlin leaned in close and whispered, "Do you really believe she's pregnant?" He then handed Denver a gun. Outside, the professor, watching the security feeds, saw Denver leading my son away and tried to call the Mint, but no one answered. Meanwhile, a hostage pointed out the director as the one who had ordered the retrieval of the smartwatch. On his knees, the director begged for his life. "I have a wife and 2 kids at home. Please don't kill me. She's not pregnant. It was all a lie." "I know," Berlin said coldly. "You're the real culprit. But I won't punish you. Your guilt is punishment enough." Denver took my son to a bathroom. "Did you lie to me about being pregnant?" he demanded. "Did you think I was a fool?" He pulled the trigger, but shot into the wall behind her. Taking a deep breath, he fired again. Tokyo burst in to find my son lying in a pool of blood, apparently dead. Berlin entered, checked for a pulse by stepping on my son's hand, and ordered Denver to dispose of the body. Furious, Tokyo ran to the control room to call the professor, but Rio stopped her. Berlin appeared. "That watch almost ruined everything," he said. "We need to show them we're serious, or they'll all rebel. I'll tell the professor myself when this is over." Tokyo reached for her gun, but Rio restrained her. The professor called again, but Berlin assured him everything was fine. He then instructed Rio to retrieve the smartwatch's data logs to see what it had recorded. Tokyo went looking for Denver. She discovered my son was still alive. Before Denver fired the first shot, my son had pleaded with him to shoot her in the leg so she could fake her death. "Berlin can't know about this," Tokyo warned. She bandaged the wound and gave my son antibiotics. "We can't let Berlin derail the professor's plan," she told Denver. "We need to remove him from command." At the police command center, Inspector Wu Jin and her team reviewed the footage from the smartwatch. They saw Rio's face. "Check all recent security footage from the Mint," Wu Jin ordered. "They must have been inside before to plan this so meticulously." Reviewing the tapes, they saw Rio and Nairobi, the counterfeiting expert, inside the Mint. "Identify that woman," Wu Jin commanded, "and find out who she's connected to." Inside, Rio accessed the smartwatch and discovered it had transmitted a short video, but he couldn't view the contents. "I have to find out what the police saw," the professor said urgently. Meanwhile, Moscow diligently dug the escape tunnel, the real one. The tunnel the hostages were digging was a decoy, intended to mislead the police during a raid. Consumed by his work, Moscow remained oblivious to the unfolding drama. Emerging from the tunnel, famished, he joined Berlin for a meal and inquired about Denver. "I haven't caused any trouble," Denver replied. Noticing Tokyo moving furtively, Berlin signaled Oslo to follow her. Oslo gave chase, and Denver, seeing this, intercepted him, resulting in a fierce brawl. Denver overpowered Oslo, leaving him unconscious. My son, seizing the opportunity, slipped out of the room and found a piece of paper to write a note to the director. "I'm okay. Don't worry about me. I'm sorry." Suddenly, Helsinki entered and discovered my son. Just then, Tokyo arrived and pointed her gun at Helsinki's head. Outside, the professor repeatedly called Inspector Wu Jin, only to reach her voicemail. At Wu Jin's house, her mother witnessed her daughter, returning from school, being driven away by her father. Unable to reach Wu Jin, her mother frantically searched for the professor's business card. The man she knew was her daughter's lover and was inside the Mint. Inside the Mint, Tokyo and Denver brought Oslo and Helsinki before Berlin, their guns trained on him. Tension within the group reached a breaking point. Tokyo demanded Rio call the professor, but he was unavailable. "The professor put me in charge," Berlin reminded her. "Why don't you ask everyone if they agree with my leadership?" Nairobi, entering the scene and witnessing the standoff, erupted in anger. Tokyo accused Berlin of violating the professor's no-killing rule, jeopardizing the entire plan. Berlin called for a vote to determine who should be in command. The result was unanimous. Berlin was deposed. The professor drove to the Royal Mint. He honked his car horn to attract the police's attention, then walked inside alone. The police, noticing him, followed. Inside the command center, the police had identified Rio and Nairobi. The professor's arrival startled Inspector Wu Jin. "Your mother called repeatedly, but couldn't reach you," he explained, "so she called me." Wu Jin took a call from her mother and learned her daughter was with her ex-husband. She pulled the professor aside and called her ex-husband. Due to a custody dispute, he was forbidden from seeing their daughter. Wu Jin demanded he return the child immediately or she would call the police. Wu Jin then curtly dismissed the professor. The captain watched him leave with suspicion, and the professor, in turn, had gleaned the information he sought. A quick glance inside the command center had revealed the photos of his 2 crew members. Back home, the professor checked the Mint's security cameras and saw the discord among his team. He immediately called inside. Berlin admitted to killing a hostage, and that Tokyo was attempting to overthrow him. The professor was furious at this breach of his core rule. The police have identified Rio and Nairobi, he announced. The news stunned everyone, exacerbating the already tense situation. Nairobi switched sides, supporting Berlin, arguing that he kept the hostages under control. Rio was terrified, knowing his parents might now discover his involvement in the robbery. The situation worsened when Moscow entered and learned Denver had supposedly killed a hostage. Moscow was devastated, not wanting his son to suffer the same fate he had a life in and out of prison. Denver chased after his father to explain. Moscow then triggered the Mint's doors and walked outside. Denver followed. Inspector Wu Jin also emerged to take charge of the police response. Denver, donning his mask, tackled his father to the ground. "Cover your face," he urged. "I'll confess," Moscow said. "I killed the hostage. I shouldn't have brought you into this." "I didn't kill her," Denver insisted. "Ask Tokyo if you don't believe me." The inspector realized both individuals were robbers, not hostages. Captain Cha immediately ordered the snipers to load their rifles. However, wanting to take them alive, the police held their fire. Just then, Berlin ordered a group of hostages to come outside. From inside the Royal Mint, a large number of masked figures emerged, creating confusion among the police, who couldn't distinguish hostages from robbers. Observing the situation via camera, the professor said to Berlin, "Clever, but what if the hostages run?" Berlin replied confidently, "They won't. They've learned their lesson." Meanwhile, Tokyo put a mask on Moscow. She also confirmed that Denver hadn't killed the hostage and that she was still alive. In the midst of the chaos, Denver and the hacker argued, dropping a gun in the process. The director quickly grabbed the weapon, turned, and pointed it at everyone. He yelled for everyone to drop their weapons, intending to run towards the police for safety. Unexpectedly, this action led the police to believe the director was one of the robbers. The captain urged the inspector to give the order to shoot. Inspector Wu Jin complied. The director was shot in the stomach, collapsing and dropping his mask. The police realized the man they shot was the director of the Royal Mint. The reporters went into a frenzy. The robbers dragged the director inside the Mint along with the rest of the gang and the hostages. Once inside, the gang worked to save the director's life. He sobbed, wanting to see his wife and children. In the control room, the police panicked, knowing their careers were over if the director died. Inspector Wu Jin called the professor to inquire about the director's condition. The professor informed her that he was still alive. Relieved, she requested permission to send a medical team inside. The professor responded, "I'll call back in 10 minutes. Captain Cha told the inspector, "If the professor lets the medical team in, I'm going in with them." On his end, the professor called Berlin to inform him of the police's request. Berlin said, "If we let them in, who knows what tricks they'll pull. If that director dies, it's because the police shot him, not us." The professor replied, "I've decided that no one else is going to die." Berlin immediately responded, "I warned you," then he hung up. The professor called Inspector Wu Jin, informing her that the medical team could enter the Mint in 1 hour. Wu Jin was elated, seeing this as a golden opportunity to subdue the gang. They began equipping Captain Cha for infiltration with the medical team, simultaneously studying the Mint's blueprints. While the surgeon operated, a police squad would sneak into the Mint through the ventilation system. Wu Jin instructed the doctor to prolong the surgery as much as possible. Captain Cha was equipped with wireless transmitting glasses. Whatever he saw would be displayed on a computer screen. Inside, Tokyo brought Rio to check on my son. Having been forced by his parents to study medicine, Rio had some medical knowledge. He said that without surgery, her leg could be permanently damaged. Denver told Rio, "The doctor's coming in soon. I'll steal their supplies. You can operate on her." Rio refused, fearing Berlin would find out. He then left. My son, inquiring about the situation, learned that the director, her lover, had been shot by the police. She gave Denver a note, asking him to deliver it to the director. Reading the note, Denver was puzzled. She was apologizing to the director, the very man who had put her in danger. Denver went to see the director, intending to give him the note, but stopped when he saw Berlin. Berlin gave the director a phone to talk to his wife and children. Upon connecting with his wife, the director sobbed, "I love you and the kids so much." Enraged, Denver pocketed the note. The medical team and Captain Cha entered the Mint. Observing via camera, the professor recognized Captain Cha as the man he had seen while infiltrating the police command post. He immediately called Berlin. The man with the glasses is a cop. The professor urged Berlin to remain calm and figure out his motive for being there. Berlin went outside and informed the others. They proceeded to scan the medical team. The scanner beeped when it reached Captain Cha's glasses. However, seeing they appeared to be ordinary glasses, they disregarded the alarm and allowed him and the medical team inside. Berlin told Nairobi, "I'm going to scare that cop and find out why he's really here." At that moment, a group of police officers, dressed in red jumpsuits and masks like the robbers, were infiltrating the Mint through a different route. The medical team began operating on the director. Captain Cha was in a complete panic. Berlin approached, pointed his gun at him, and ordered him to pick up a scalpel and operate on the director. Captain Cha pulled down his mask and revealed himself as a police officer. He claimed he was only there to protect the medical team and had no ulterior motives. Finding this plausible, Berlin allowed the surgery to continue. Meanwhile, the red-suited police officers crawled through the ventilation shafts and into the Mint. They managed to open a vent cover and drop down inside. Denver pretended to drop some surgical instruments, quickly slipping a scalpel into his pocket. The professor, observing the situation remotely, felt something was amiss. He noticed something unusual about Captain Cha's glasses. Finally, it dawned on him. The medical team was likely a diversion, allowing another police unit to infiltrate the Mint through a secret route he hadn't anticipated. Inside the Mint, the medical team finished the surgery and exited with Captain Cha. Upon reaching the main hall, they saw that Berlin had changed the masks of both the robbers and the hostages. Captain Cha's face drained of color. Inspector Wu Jin immediately called the police team, ordering them to retreat. "They've switched masks. You'll be caught." Captain Cha rushed outside and warned his team to abort the operation. Tokyo and the others searched every room, but the police had already retreated. The gang had once again thwarted the inspector's plan, thanks to the professor's uncanny intuition. Another significant victory, while confiscating Captain Cha's phone, Helsinki had managed to install spyware. Now, the professor could see and hear everything Captain Cha did and said. Denver, using the scalpel he'd taken, prepared to operate on my son's wound. But as he picked up the scalpel, his hand trembled uncontrollably. Tokyo had to fetch Rio for help. The naive my son still managed to ask Denver about the director's surgery. She asked if he'd given the director her note. Denver lied, saying he had, and that the director said he loved her, hoping to give her strength for her own impending surgery. When Tokyo went to find Rio, Oslo apprehended her. Knowing Rio had a crush on Tokyo, Berlin used her as bait. "Are you hiding something from me?" Berlin threatened Rio. "If you don't tell me, I'll throw Tokyo out to the police." Rio, heartbroken, relented. Berlin then tied up both Tokyo and Rio. Berlin and Oslo entered the room and pointed their guns at Denver. Seeing that my son was still alive, Berlin wanted to execute her to maintain control over the hostages. Denver desperately tried to stop him. My son fainted. Suddenly, Nairobi, along with Tokyo and Rio, burst in and overpowered Berlin and Oslo. The professor's lover declared she no longer supported Berlin, refusing to follow a killer. Meanwhile, my son suffered a seizure, prompting Rio to perform surgery. The retired doctor successfully removed the bullet from my son's leg. Afterwards, he stuck his head in a toilet, overcome with nausea. Despite his medical training, he had a severe aversion to blood. The hacker had been forced by his parents to attend medical school to carry on the family tradition. That pressure led him to join the Heist, a desperate attempt to sabotage his life. Now, with his identity exposed, he worried about his parents. Rio told Tokyo, "After this job, I'll buy an island and we'll live there together forever." Tokyo abruptly stood up and walked away. My son awoke to find Denver giving her a blood transfusion. He confessed to not delivering the note to the director. When he was crying on the phone to his wife and kids, I saw how despicable he was, so I kept the note, Denver explained. My son gazed at Denver adoringly and thanked him. The professor, watching through the cameras, was relieved to see the hostage alive. He then announced that Tokyo would take over as leader and demanded to speak with Berlin. "You broke the rules, so I'm punishing you," the professor told Berlin. "You're confined until I need you." The gang was elated to have neutralized Berlin, at least temporarily. Outside, the press condemned Inspector Wu Jin for authorizing the shooting that critically injured a hostage. A wave of criticism and demands for a new negotiator put immense pressure on her. Arriving home, she tried to appear calm, but the sight of her mother, struggling with dementia, brought her to tears. She felt utterly alone. Overwhelmed with sadness and lacking anyone to confide in, she went to the professor's coffee shop, only to find it closed. As she turned to leave, the professor emerged. He quickly picked up on her emotional state. "I know you appear strong because you're the pillar of your family," he said. "But when you're sad, you don't know who to turn to. You can talk to me." They went inside to talk. The inspector confessed her daughter's fear of her leaving and her mother's illness, explaining why she could never afford to show weakness. When the professor asked, "What illness does your mother have?" the inspector replied, "Just old age." They found solace in each other's arms, a release from the mounting stress. Upon waking, the inspector searched the house for her lover. As she reached for a door, the professor appeared. "It's just a storage room," he said. Elsewhere, Captain Cha secretly met with a high-ranking North Korean official. "Our plans have been thwarted recently," the official stated. "The blame lies with the South Koreans. Inspector Wu Jin is likely a traitor or being manipulated by the robbers. The upcoming Inter-Korean Economic Summit is crucial. You must end this before it begins." Captain Cha promised to do his utmost. Inside the Mint, a North Korean police officer appeared. It turned out that instead of retreating with his comrades, he had stayed behind to scout the situation. He blended in with the other hostages, acting as if he were one of them. While everyone was sleeping, noticing that Oslo, the guard, had dozed off, the police officer got up and slipped outside. The American ambassador's daughter witnessed this. The North Korean officer then contacted Captain Cha outside. Captain Cha said, "Our party orders us to end this as soon as possible. Find the professor, the leader, and kill him. Without him, the gang will be like a snake without its head." The police officer asked, "What about the safety of the hostages?" Captain Cha replied, "Taking down the professor is the top priority. Every battle has its sacrifices." Captain Cha ordered the North Korean soldiers to carry out the plan secretly, without informing the South Koreans. Berlin was now being held in a separate room. His hands were trembling. When Rio entered to bring him food, Berlin said, "I'm seriously ill. Get me the medicine bottle from the control room." Rio, thinking Berlin was faking it, turned to leave. Enraged, Berlin threw the entire tray of food onto the floor. The North Korean police officer, along with the other hostages, were gathered in the main hall. The con artist announced that, from that day forward, Tokyo would be in charge. Then, Denver escorted my son outside. All the hostages were elated to see that she was still alive. Under Tokyo's management, the atmosphere among the hostages became more relaxed and friendly. However, the seeds of discord were being sown, unbeknownst to the gang. After a passionate night, the inspector had regained her composure. She entered the command center with renewed energy, encouraging the police from both sides to keep fighting. Then, she called the mysterious professor to negotiate. When the inspector asked, "What did you have for breakfast today?" the professor honestly replied, "A sandwich." The inspector agreed to send in supplies for the robbers, but demanded that the professor guarantee the safety of all the hostages. The director was now trying to rekindle his romance with my son. He used all sorts of sweet talk, but she remained indifferent. My son, now having her wounds regularly tended to by Denver, was starting to develop feelings for him. The North Korean police officer then ran into the director. The director asked, "Who are you? You look unfamiliar." Just then, the American ambassador's daughter, Annie, appeared and pulled the police officer away. She said, "I know you're a policeman. I can help you." The police officer asked, "Do you know who the professor is?" Annie replied, "I haven't met him, but maybe my son knows." Annie led the police officer to my son to ask about the professor, but she said she'd never met him. At that moment, the director entered the room. The three hostages then cooperated with the North Korean police officer to find the mysterious professor. Outside, the inspector began inspecting the supplies to be sent in. She realized that there couldn't be sandwiches inside the Mint. as they weren't on the menu. The inspector began to suspect that the professor might be outside. He had just told her he'd had a sandwich for breakfast. The professor overheard everything through Captain Cha's phone. He knew he had made a grave mistake. The inspector ordered her team to track down the vehicle that had brought the con artist to the mint before the robbery. She was certain that if they caught the professor, everything would be over. The professor now gathered everyone and asked, "Oslo, have you destroyed that car yet? It has all of our fingerprints. If the police find it, we're done for." Oslo replied, "It's at the junkyard near the border." Tokyo recognized the junkyard, having worked with car smugglers there before. The professor immediately set off to find the car. Meanwhile, the police had located the white car. The female inspector quickly headed to the junkyard to investigate. Inside the Royal Mint, the North Korean police officer told 3 hostages, "We need to find the professor. I'm going to eliminate him. Then, the police will storm the place." Anne asked, "What about the safety of the hostages?" The director tried to persuade the 2 women to go along with the police officer's plan. He told my son to seduce Denver and interrogate him to find out who the real professor was. My son was hesitant and conflicted, but ultimately, she agreed to the North Korean officer's plan. Denver, sitting alone, received a note from my son asking him to meet her in the warehouse. Excitedly, he went to the warehouse. As he opened the door and stepped inside, the police officer knocked him unconscious. Then, the police officer and the director tortured Denver, demanding, "Who is the mysterious professor?" Denver claimed to be the professor, but the director didn't believe him. After some speculation, he concluded that Tokyo was the real professor. Outside, Captain Cha was informed by his subordinates that they had located the professor. He ordered them to prepare to raid the mint immediately, saying they couldn't miss the opportunity. Inside, the North Korean officer triggered the fire alarm to create chaos among the robbers. Tokyo and Nairobi immediately went to the control room to check. Looking at the cameras, they saw Berlin struggling on the floor. Tokyo ordered Nairobi, "Gather all the hostages in the lobby." Then she told Rio, "Go check on Berlin." The North Korean officer activated the entire fire suppression system, filling the mint with smoke. At that moment, the director was furiously beating Denver, venting his anger from being held captive. My son intervened, but to no avail. She grabbed a gun and pointed it at the director to save Denver. Denver sprang up and kicked the director, knocking him to the ground. They then escaped. Rio entered the room and found Berlin struggling. He unlocked Berlin. But immediately afterward, Berlin attacked Rio, leaving him motionless. Tokyo and Helsinki entered the printing area to find whoever pulled the fire alarm. At that moment, the North Korean officer was about to shoot Tokyo, believing her to be the professor. Suddenly, Denver entered and told Tokyo, "We have to call the professor now." Berlin appeared, pointed his gun at the North Korean officer, and fired. The gunshot startled everyone. Outside, Captain Cha lost contact with the North Korean officer. Berlin fired several more shots. He stopped only when Tokyo entered. At the junkyard, the professor sped towards it on a motorcycle. The female inspector and several police cars were also on their way. Upon arrival, the professor accessed the management software, entered the car's license plate to find its information, and then retrieved the car key. When the professor was discovered by the foreman and his men, he fought them off and escaped. Just then, the police arrived. After searching, the professor found the car he was looking for. He got in and meticulously wiped away any fingerprints inside. The inspector, also looking for the car, arrived moments later, realizing she was trapped. The professor started the engine and rammed the car through the barrier, escaping with the inspector and the police in hot pursuit. The professor drove down into a field and through an organic tomato farm. Emerging on the other side, he came face to face with the inspector and the police. She almost saw his face before he reversed into a grassy field. Surrounded, the professor lit a cigarette to steady his nerves, then floored it, continuing his escape. The car ultimately plunged down a dam. It took some time for the police to reach the bottom of the dam. By the time they did, the car was empty. The professor had enough time to swim to safety outside the mint. Inside, the sound of gunshots caused panic amongst the hostages' families, and the reporters gathered outside. Back at the command post, the inspector berated Captain Cha for his unauthorized actions that led to the death of a police officer. Captain Cha whispered to her that she might be being manipulated by the robbers. The inspector insisted that despite everything, they had to work together. She questioned, why haven't they killed any hostages? They even allowed a medical team inside. She theorized that the robbers were concerned about public opinion, and they would use that to their advantage. She declared that she would enter the mint herself. Back home, the professor called the Tokyo Mint, suggesting that Berlin be reinstated as leader, claiming that without him, he would have been killed by the police. Berlin retorted that he only cared about escaping with the money. Who was in charge didn't matter. Just then, the inspector called the professor to negotiate. Have you killed anyone? She asked. We haven't harmed any hostages, the professor replied. The inspector continued. The hostages' families are frantic. Public opinion demands armed intervention. I need to enter the mint personally to confirm the safety of all hostages and calm the public. Otherwise, we will cut off your supplies. The professor agreed. After we receive the supplies, you can come in. The professor then addressed the gang. Public opinion is the final piece of our plan. Everyone, prepare meticulously for tomorrow. The chief inspector announced to the press, tomorrow, we will enter the mint to confirm the safety of the hostages. The entire operation will be broadcast live. Tokyo gathered the hostages and informed them, tomorrow, the police will enter to confirm your safety and reassure your families. Please cooperate. Young Anne was consumed with guilt, believing she was responsible for the police officer's death. When the assistant director slipped away to speak privately with Anne, the director followed. He suggested they write a message on the banknotes and slip it to the police to inform them that the robbers were buying time to print money. He told Anne, only you can do this. If you're caught, they won't dare harm you. Anne agreed. The assistant director then snuck into the printing area, took a bill, and gave it to little Anne. The girl wrote on the bill, the police officer has been killed. They're printing money and digging a tunnel to escape. Outside, the inspector was ready and waiting with the cameraman to enter the building. The captured footage was also being live-streamed and projected in the town square for the hostages' families to watch. At that moment, everyone inside was surprised to see Berlin walk out without his mask. The professor was also sitting in the square, monitoring the entire situation. Berlin announced he would bring each hostage out one by one to be identified on camera. The mint director came out first. He called out to his wife and children and burst into tears. The other hostages followed. The police had now also discovered Berlin's true identity, a prison escapee from North Korea. Next, the US ambassador's daughter, Anne, was brought out. Her parents anxiously watched. Little Anne pretended to sob uncontrollably, prompting the inspector to approach and comfort her. As the girl tried to slip the bill to Inspector Raquel Murillo, referred to here as the inspector or Cha, implying a familial title, Tokyo stopped her and led her back inside. Tokyo and Berlin discovered the hidden bill with the writing. The little girl shouted and protested before being taken away. The inspector demanded that all the hostages be brought out at once, as the process was taking too long. Berlin then brought all the hostages out to present them to the public. The inspector checked each hostage against the list of names she had brought with her. After calling out the names, the inspector said the North Korean police officer was missing. Berlin stated that there was no such hostage present. The inspector asked, "Do any of the hostages know this officer? Did they kill him?" The inspector approached Anne. Just as the girl was about to reveal everything, Tokyo covered her mouth. The inspector seized the opportunity to gain the upper hand in the public eye. She thought her plan was working, but everything was playing out according to the professor's calculations. Suddenly, Denver led a masked figure outside. When the mask was removed, it was revealed to be the North Korean police officer. Berlin had indeed shot him the previous day, but the officer had been wearing a bulletproof vest. The professor used this to regain public support. At that very moment, the news crew's van outside received a USB drive containing footage of the North Korean police officer infiltrating the mint, causing disruption, and attempting to take down the leader of the robbers. Berlin declared, "If we hadn't stopped this officer in time, the police would have stormed in, and many hostages could have been killed. You police don't care about the safety of the hostages." Berlin boldly declared to the media, "We may be robbers, but we haven't harmed anyone." At least we care more about protecting human lives than the police do." Inspector Wu Jin walked out, stunned. It turned out that the professor had anticipated all of her plans and led her into a trap. The gang members were elated as public opinion swayed in their favor. Everyone sang Berlin's praises. Tokyo, the second in command, patted Berlin on the shoulder and commended him. Moscow, the seasoned digger, rushed in, panicked. But it turned out he was bringing good news. They had dug through to the earth layer beneath the mint. Good news kept coming, thrilling everyone. In the middle of the night, Denver woke my son to change her bandages. He told her, "When we get out of here, find yourself a decent guy and fall in love." My son then kissed Denver. The two embraced and spent the night together. Inspector Wu Jin was now under immense pressure from both the public and her superiors. Captain Cha stepped forward and said, "I'll go find that professor myself and ask him about the man who attacked the Special Forces team the other day." The inspector immediately defended her boyfriend. The professor overheard their conversation through spyware installed on Captain Cha's phone. Later, the inspector invited the professor out for drinks. They had a pleasant conversation and walked home together. The professor said, "Could you quit your job at the mint? You look so exhausted." Hearing this, the inspector embraced him and said, "Now I have motivation to keep working." The professor felt a pang of guilt towards her. Suddenly, the inspector pulled a small corner of a banknote from her pocket. It turned out little Annie had slipped it into her pocket while being escorted. The inspector said goodbye to the professor and quickly left. Back at the task force headquarters, she matched the corner with a complete bill. She had deduced that the robbers were stalling for time to print money inside the mint. "I don't know what they're printing money for," the inspector said, "because with the serial numbers, it won't be usable." She requested a check of the mint's power consumption to confirm their printing operation. When the professor returned to his coffee shop, he found Captain Cha waiting for him. Feigning ignorance, the professor invited him inside. Captain Cha inquired about the coffee shop and was treated to a meal. Afterward, he excused himself to use the restroom. Inside, he snooped around and discovered a hidden room. The professor appeared. Captain Cha quickly grabbed a letter opener and then left. Back in his car, he called the Department of Justice to help him analyze fingerprints from the letter opener. The professor, having overheard Captain Cha's call, knew he had taken the letter opener. The U.S. ambassador went to see Congressman Kim Sang-man to urge him to rescue his daughter from the mint. He threatened, "If my daughter Anne loses even a hair, you will never have a summit. Don't think I don't know that you and that Tycoon O are plotting to take some money from that fake D Economic Cooperation Conference." When the ambassador left, the congressman went inside to talk to the tycoon. The tycoon told the congressman, "The robbers are printing money at the mint. They are plotting to steal 4 trillion from us. Do you know how much money I spent to support your candidacy for president? Immediately raid the mint to arrest those robbers." The congressman asked, "What about the US ambassador's daughter?" The tycoon replied, "Just kill her and that's it. The inspector can go back to the headquarters." The boss announced that the superiors had ordered us to stop eavesdropping on the radio signals around the mint. The inspector was very upset when she heard it. Congressman Kim Sang-man went on TV to call on the robbers. "Let's release the hostages because their families are in great pain," and promised that if the robbers surrender, their sentences will be reduced. This congressman was extremely skillful in gathering the hackers' parents to appear on TV because Rio's identity had been revealed before. When hacker Rio saw his parents appear on TV, he began to panic and waver. Captain Cha is now entering the police station to scan the fingerprints on the professor's box cutter. Little Anne was sitting in the toilet when someone threw a piece of paper in. The paper said, "I will help you escape from here. I will wait at the police station in the basement at 1 p.m. In the police control room, the inspector realized that there must be something very important for her ex-husband to appear on TV and make such a statement. A police officer investigating learned that the series of money was made according to the annual money printing plan, so even if there was a robbery, the money could not be printed or used for circulation. However, the upcoming summit will decide to print another 4 trillion, and the series number of this 4 trillion has also been set. The inspector then went to see Congressman Kim Sang-man, who is also her ex-husband. She asked, "Is it true that the upcoming summit will decide to release 4 trillion, and you are afraid that robbers will grab that money, so you interfered with this plan?" The congressman immediately said, "Why don't you use force to suppress those robbers? Is it because of the daughter of the US ambassador that the police don't dare to act?" The inspector was very surprised when she heard that and asked, "Are you plotting something with that little Anne?" Because they had lived together for many years. With just a few words from the congressman, the inspector could guess what he was thinking and what he was going to do. The inspector left and called the police station to ask to be connected to the professor. The inspector informed the professor, "There is a spy in your gang and he is trying to kill little Anne." Tokyo heard that and immediately ran to look for Anne everywhere. Rio checked the cameras and saw that someone had taken a bomb from our warehouse. Tokyo carefully examined the cameras and found out that this person was placing a bomb in the safe in the basement. She and Rio immediately ran there. Little Anne also went downstairs and opened the door to the room where the bomb was. Tokyo then rushed there. When she opened the door, the bomb exploded, but luckily she and Rio dodged the bomb. The hostages were terrified when they heard the bomb explode, but were surprised to see Anne come out and still safe. Anne later told everyone, "I was supposed to escape, but I was worried that if I escaped, everyone here would be in danger, so I decided to go back. Thanks to that, I was lucky to escape." The professor informed his second-in-command and the director, "I know where the robbers are holding the security guards and the North Korean officer." Meanwhile, in Tokyo, he and his team were meeting, trying to figure out who the mole was that slipped the note to Anne. Suspicion brewed amongst them, further fracturing the group's already fragile unity. Inspector Wu Jin called the professor to check on Anne's safety. Relieved to hear the girl was unharmed, she then pressed him, "What do you really want?" "I just want to get rich, and I don't want anyone to get hurt," he replied. Wu Jin vented to her superior, "Because of that damn summit, those politicians are willing to kill people. How did the robbers even know about the 4 trillion won being transferred through the Unification Fund? We need to stop them from getting the money out and protect the hostages. We'll cut the power to the entire mint to stop them from printing," she suggested. An IT officer then announced he'd found a message sent to the robbers from an outside source, Captain Cha. Everyone was stunned. Captain Cha, a mole. But the fake messages, it turned out, were the work of Rio, the hacker, who had planted spyware on Cha's phone. The professor ordered Rio to block any communication between Cha and Wu Jin. Captain Cha was using his fingerprint to verify the professor's identity when a group of inspectors arrived. Realizing they were there to arrest him, Cha resisted and took an officer hostage. "We suspect you're the robbers inside, man," the officer said. Cha retreated into a room and printed the results of the fingerprint scan from the professor's box cutter. When the inspectors entered, he was gone. Outside, he tried desperately to contact Wu Jin to tell her the professor was her boyfriend, but couldn't get through. Cha went to Wu Jin's house. Suddenly, the professor appeared, pointing a gun at his head. Cha attacked, but the professor injected him with a tranquilizer. He carried Cha to his car. Wu Jin's mother witnessed everything from inside the house. Left with no choice, the professor entered the house, gun in hand. As he was about to confront the mother, he realized she was suffering from dementia and seemed to have forgotten what she'd seen. He retreated. The professor drove to a gas station, switched cars, and left. 2 unknown individuals appeared and drove off in the car he'd abandoned. Arriving home, he found Wu Jin waiting. He invited her in. As soon as they were inside, she drew her gun and pointed it at him. "Why did you deliberately approach me 2 months ago?" she demanded, then ordered him upstairs. She told him to open the storage room. Inside, she switched on the light. Nothing. "I'm sorry," Wu Jin said. "A colleague of mine is suspected of being the mole, but I trust him. He said you were suspicious, so I had to do this." "Let's end this here," the professor said. "Leave." Back in the mint, Anne, while distributing food, slipped a note onto a tray destined for the North Korean officers group. The note reached the North Korean officer. Meanwhile, the mint director feigned a stomach ache to access the restroom. There, he retrieved a cell phone and flashlight he'd hidden inside his stomach, stashing them in the toilet tank. The North Korean officer later went to the same restroom to retrieve the items. Suspicion festered within the gang. Berlin insisted Rio was the mole, claiming he'd seen his parents on TV and gone soft. They began pointing guns at each other. Just then, Oslo brought water to the captive security guards and the North Korean officer. As he bent down to pick something up, the officer raised a baton to attack. The professor, watching on camera, tried to call the command room, but his team was too busy aiming weapons at one another. Outside, Woo Jin ordered a complete power shutdown of the Mint. The North Korean officer struck Oslo's head just as the lights went out. After subduing Oslo, the hostages grabbed weapons and slipped out. The professor lost his visual feed. The hostages regrouped. "We're getting out of here," they declared. The North Korean officer led the escape. He then attacked and incapacitated Helsinki to allow the hostages to flee. Helsinki, though subdued, managed to fire a warning shot before being choked unconscious. Tokyo rushed to the electrical control room and activated the backup generator. As the lights flickered back on, the gang saw Helsinki lying unconscious. They carried him to the main hall. Upon waking, Helsinki immediately went looking for Oslo. Rio announced the hostages were escaping through the back. The hostages descended, only to find the exit rigged with a web of explosives. The deputy director tried to ram a car into the door, but Denver stopped him. Berlin and the others arrived just in time to regain control of the hostages. Rio returned to the control room and informed the professor that the situation was contained. Suddenly, the North Korean officer entered. He forced Rio to connect him to the police headquarters, punched him, and made the call himself. He reported that the hostages were escaping and requested backup. He instructed the police to storm the Mint as a diversion, allowing the hostages to escape from the rooftop. The officer then destroyed the control room equipment, severing the gang's communication with the professor. He grabbed a bottle of Berlin's medication and left. Police forces closed in, using explosives to breach the Mint and engaging in a firefight with the gang. Berlin and his team fought back, but their ammunition dwindled. Just then, from above, Tokyo unleashed a barrage of fire from a powerful machine gun, forcing the police to retreat. The North Korean officer appeared, signaling the hostages to move to the rooftop. Berlin and the others pushed the police back outside and barricaded the breach. Then, they raced to the roof to stop the hostages' escape. Outside, police inflated airbags for the hostages to jump onto. A group reached the rooftop and called for help. The gang pursued them, apprehending some of the slower hostages. Denver caught my son, but urged her to escape. The North Korean officer insisted women and children go first, but the Mint director selfishly tried to descend first. His rope snagged, leaving him dangling precariously. Tokyo tried shooting the lock, but failed. The hostages began jumping onto the airbags and fleeing. Many escaped. Suddenly, Berlin stepped forward and freed the rope. Seeing the American ambassador's daughter about to jump, he grabbed the rope himself, jumped down, and caught her. Tokyo urged my son to help pull them up, and together they managed to get all three back onto the roof. News reports announced that half the hostages had escaped safely. The gang discovered Oslo unconscious, having lost too much blood. Rio could do nothing. Everyone wept. "We'll take Oslo out with us," Tokyo declared. They prepared his body. Tokyo addressed the remaining hostages. "If anything like that happens again, we won't spare you." She began reassigning tasks, but the hostages were now defiant and uncooperative. Panic set in as they lost contact with the professor and were unsure what to do next. Berlin began to tremble. His medication had been broken during the chaos. Arguments erupted again about who the mole was that led to Oslo's death. Berlin collapsed, convulsing. The truth emerged: the mole was Nairobi, coerced by politician Kim Min-sang, who was holding her son hostage. The situation inside the Mint deteriorated, leaderless and chaotic. The professor went to the location where Captain Cha was being held. It turned out he had a separate team operating outside. The police interviewed the escaped hostages, who provided descriptions of the gang members. The North Korean officer gave Woo Jin the medication he'd taken from the control room. Woo Jin's investigation revealed that one of the robbers suffered from a rare disease, with only a handful of cases in all of South Korea. She ordered a trace of the medication's distribution channels. Inside the Mint, Berlin lay unconscious from medication withdrawal. Rio remembered Berlin mentioning his critical illness and dependence on medication. Three of them searched the control room for more. Seeing the label, Rio realized Berlin's condition was extremely rare. Berlin was quarantined. Waking up, Tokyo was approached by Berlin, who wanted to know how she was doing. Berlin explained, My parents tried to escape the country to find a cure for my illness. After that, I was imprisoned, which made my condition worsen." He stood up, grabbed a paper knife, held it to Tokyo's throat, and walked outside. He told Rio, "Tokyo is the traitor. Helsinki, come here." When Helsinki arrived, Berlin declared, "Tokyo is the spy. She's the one who got Oslo killed." Hearing this, Helsinki immediately pointed his gun at Rio and knocked him unconscious. Both Tokyo and Rio were then tied up and placed on a gurney. Berlin summoned everyone. "One of these two is the traitor," he announced. "I'm going to avenge Oslo." Rio, to protect Tokyo, confessed to being the traitor. Suddenly, Berlin pressed a button, opening the doors of the mint. He declared Tokyo the true traitor and coldly shoved her out to the waiting police. Outside, Tokyo was promptly arrested. Berlin then took Anne hostage, forcing her to read aloud from a piece of paper. The message demanded the presence of the cruel warden, Yun Chang-soo. Berlin insisted on seeing his enemy before he died. "If he doesn't show up," he threatened, "I'll deal with this girl." Meanwhile, Inspector Wu Jin, on her way to work, received a call. Her officer informed her they'd tracked down the source of the rare medication Berlin required and identified a recent bulk buyer. "I checked the security footage," the officer reported, "and the vehicle disappeared near the mountains." Wu Jin responded, "That could be where the professor is hiding. I'm going there now." At that moment, Sihun, sitting in a nearby car, called the professor. "I've planted a tracker on the inspector's car," she informed him. "You can follow her." Wu Jin mobilized a large police force to search the abandoned building near the mountains. The professor watched from a distance. Inside, Wu Jin discovered a room filled with banners protesting the upcoming Economic Cooperation Summit and pictures of high-ranking officials from both North and South Korea. Suddenly, the police discovered a bomb. Everyone scrambled outside just as the professor detonated it. Sihun called him with the news. Berlin handed Tokyo over to the police. "He's probably losing it without his medication." The professor replied, "I think I know why Berlin did that." It was revealed that the professor and Berlin were brothers. As children, their parents tried to swim across a river to escape to South Korea. Their mother was shot dead by North Korean soldiers. The father and the professor made it across, but Berlin was captured and sent to a refugee camp. Desperate to raise money to free his son, their father robbed a bank and was killed by the police. Back at the police station, Inspector Wu Jin interrogated Tokyo. "Cooperate with us," she offered, "and we'll reduce your sentence by half." Wu Jin pressed, "Was your plan politically motivated, rather than for money?" Tokyo insisted, "I was only in it for the money. In South Korea, money is everything. Berlin accused me of being a spy and threw me to the wolves. He's off his meds and crazy." Wu Jin ordered a lie detector test. "Who is the professor?" she asked. Tokyo responded sarcastically, "He has 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a mouth." She then descended into hysterics, screaming and thrashing. The police subdued her and took her away. Things were spiraling into chaos, and it seemed the heist was falling apart. But surprisingly, it was all part of Tokyo and Berlin's secret plan. When Berlin pushed Tokyo out, it was a ruse. Another gang member, the con artist, intervened, claiming to be the real traitor. She explained that Congressman Kim Sang-man was holding her son hostage in an orphanage as leverage. Tokyo and Berlin had faked their conflict to flush out the true spy. The gang also forgave Nairobi. "I'll take Tokyo outside and pretend there's internal conflict," Berlin explained. "The professor will understand and rescue her. We need to contact him, and Tokyo has to take the risk." As the police transported Tokyo, a van intercepted them. Masked figures emerged, spray-painted the police car windows black, and planted bombs on the vehicles. Sihun appeared, gun drawn, aiming at the officers guarding Tokyo. Recognizing they were outmatched, the police surrendered. Sihun freed Tokyo, introducing herself and the others as members of Berlin's gang. At police headquarters, Congressman Kim Sang-man arrived, announcing, "From now on, the counter-terrorism unit will take over," and dismissed his ex-wife, Wu Jin. Warden Yong-ju, now a prominent North Korean politician, also arrived to meet with Berlin as requested. Wu Jin received a report. The prisoner transport was attacked, and the prisoner escaped. She realized pushing Tokyo out had been a ploy. Wu Jin asked her officer to investigate what leverage Congressman Kim Sang-man held that could compel someone within the gang to attempt to kill Anne. The officer discovered that Kim Sang-man's men had taken the con artist, Nairobi's son, from the orphanage but hadn't returned him. Wu Jin realized, "I think I know where he's keeping the boy." The professor informed Tokyo and Sihun that Kim Sang-man owned a villa in the suburbs where he was likely holding Nairobi's son. Berlin's gang, along with Tokyo, headed to the villa for a rescue mission. Adhering to the professor's humanitarian principles, they used rubber bullets. Dressed in red jumpsuits and masks, they infiltrated the villa, engaging Kim Sang-man's guards. Since the guards were unarmed, the gang quickly overpowered them and found Nairobi's son. "Who are you?" the boy asked Tokyo. "I'm a friend of your mother's," she replied. "Come with me." As Tokyo carried the boy outside, they encountered Wu Jin. Tokyo told the boy, "She's a police officer. Go with her. She'll keep you safe." The boy obeyed, running to Wu Jin and hugging her tightly. Berlin's gang escaped in their vehicle. Alone and outgunned, Wu Jin could do nothing. At the Mint, Warden Yongju began negotiations with Berlin. "Today, I'm going to expose your dirty secrets," Berlin declared. "You starved, tortured, and murdered prisoners in Camp 14. The politician admitted to the accusation, retorting, "But didn't you rape my daughter in revenge?" Congressman Kim Sang-man attempted to manipulate public opinion, but Berlin was one step ahead. Footage of Sihun's gang raiding his villa to rescue the boy was streamed live on social media. A masked figure addressed the public, revealing Kim Sang-man had kidnapped a child to control one of their members. Removing the mask, Sihun revealed her identity. "I am Yongju's illegitimate daughter," she declared. "He raped me as a child and then made me a medic in the prison to keep me close. He tortured and killed prisoners for sport. After he discovered my relationship with Berlin, he tried to kill us both, but we escaped. The man who brought him to this fake peace summit is Congressman Kim Sang-man, the leading presidential candidate." Berlin added, "This summit is just a scheme to enrich themselves. After this, a vast sum of money will line their pockets. They are the real thieves, stealing from the people." Public outrage against Kim Sang-man and Yongju erupted. Inside the Mint, Berlin told Rio that he and the professor were brothers and that they should prepare for Tokyo's return. He then addressed the hostages, "I'm releasing some of you. But for those who stay and help us, you'll receive 3 billion won." Humiliated and played for a fool, Inspector Wu Jin was removed from the task force. Dejected, she went to the professor's coffee shop, finding it closed. Suddenly, she collapsed. The professor, arriving home, found her and took her to the hospital. Kim Sang-man, Yongju, and North Korean Tycoon Oh strategized to capture the robbers and ensure the inter-Korean summit proceeded smoothly. Seeing the robbers' livestream, where Berlin announced the hostage release at 3 p.m., Kim Sang-man ordered the chief inspector to shut down the internet. "If we do that, ours will go down too," the chief inspector countered. Tycoon Oh declared, "The summit must happen in 3 days. Find a way to catch those robbers." Berlin told his team, "We must get Tokyo back inside to learn the professor's new plan. We'll use the chaos of the hostage release as cover." Berlin addressed the hostages. "Have you decided? Freedom or 3 billion won?" The director scoffed. "These bastards? 3 billion? They just want to exploit our labor." Berlin revealed bags of cash, dumping them on the floor. "After this operation succeeds, you'll get your money," he promised. "I can't reveal the method yet because some departing hostages might inform the police." He then interviewed each hostage. Blinded by greed, the director chose to stay. Berlin assured him a courier would deliver his share later. "My son told Denver, 'I don't need the money, but I'm staying with you.'" Denver kissed her passionately. The printing team leader also chose to stay, stating he'd never had such a good boss. Nairobi and Anne informed Rio they were staying, curious to see how the plan unfolded. The hostages gathered, and everyone was shocked when the director joined the group staying, along with the American ambassador's daughter. The remaining hostages were led back to work. Moscow saw that his son was very close to the girl My Son, so he pulled his son inside to talk. Denver confessed to his father, "My son and I are in love. She didn't choose to leave here to stay with me." Moscow asked, "Didn't she say she didn't need money but only love? You're making the same mistake as your father." Your mother used to be a bank teller, and your father came to rob her. She also said the same thing to your father as that girl, but then what? Your mother regretted it and abandoned us." Denver heard and started to panic. Denver then talked to Berlin. He asked Berlin, "I heard you lured that girl Sihun to run away with you, right? Are you two still very happy?" Berlin said, "Now I regret bringing her along." Denver heard the answer and became even more panicked. Denver then went to my son and told her to go out with the other hostages, because I'm tired of you. You're just pretending to stay to get 3 billion, right? My son heard and slapped Denver and called her a dog. Then the girl walked out. Denver was left alone and burst into tears. The female inspector now asked the hospital to let her out early. She called the chief, but he told her to rest more. Then she went to see Professor Wu Jin, thanked him for taking her to the hospital, and announced, "I've left the case at the Mint. I'm sorry for doubting you." The professor heard and began to soften. When the female inspector left, the guy ran after her and hugged her. The two then chatted happily and discussed travel plans to the port city of Cannes. The professor said, "Your father really wanted to come here, but in his last days he forgot all about it because he also had dementia." The professor then went to Tokyo and announced that it was time to return to the Mint. Sihun gave Tokyo the medicine bottles to give to his lover Berlin. The inspector drove away, suddenly remembering the professor's words, "Your father also has dementia." The word "also" in this sentence made her suspicious, because she had never told him that her mother had dementia. Outside the Mint, reporters and protesters were now gathering in large numbers, causing chaos. The senator ordered, "Get all the reporters and YouTubers out of the scene." He then mobilized all the special police from both sides and laid siege to the Mint. Berlin gathered the hostages and prepared to let them out. Rio pressed the button to open the door, then planned to broadcast the entire hostage release live. But all the network connections around the Mint were cut off. The reporters outside were also in an uproar. Berlin then proceeded to release the hostages outside. As the hostages ran forward, Tokyo now drove a motorbike and jumped out of a nearby truck. The girl sped into the Mint at full speed. Sihun also controlled a forest of flycams to follow behind to cover the girl and distract the pickup soldiers. Tokyo sneaked into the middle of the fleeing hostages to get inside. Unexpectedly, the girl my son also decided to go back inside the Mint. Tokyo then successfully re-entered the Mint. The informant couple Denver and my son also made it inside. Everyone proceeded to close the Mint. The congressman was extremely angry but pretended to visit the hostages to regain his image. Tokyo gave medicine to Berlin. Denver also hugged his girlfriend my son warmly. Everyone was happy and excited, but no one knew that Uncle Moscow had been shot by the police while covering for Tokyo. The inspector returned home and checked the party mother's notebook, but found nothing. She asked the mother, "Have you ever met that cafe owner?" The mother replied, "I think I've seen him around here, but I don't remember specifically." The inspector immediately went to the Department of Justice and recalled the unusual things Mr. Tai had done. She asked someone to check what information Captain Dad had been looking for there. Afterward, she also discovered the professor's true identity. She learned that he had renounced his North Korean citizenship and become a South Korean citizen with a new identity. Captain Dad dislocated his own hand to slip it out of the figure-8 handcuffs, then managed to unlock them. He then stumbled upon the gang's tunnel. He hurriedly ran outside, but just then, the professor and Sihun arrived. Discovering the captain's escape, they gave chase. After surrounding Captain Dad, he quickly jumped onto a passing car. He was then hit hard and knocked unconscious. Perhaps due to his North Korean military training, Captain Dad was incredibly brave. The surrounding people began to check on Captain Dad, leaving the professor and his gang unable to act. Inside the money printing factory, Tokyo informed everyone of the professor's new plan. The professor predicted that the Inter-Korean Economic Summit would be held a day earlier than scheduled, and they would have to leave the next day. Nairobi, the con artist boss, said, "The money is printed, but the tunnel isn't finished yet." Tokyo responded, "We'll mobilize all our forces to dig the tunnel, because Berlin's men are digging from the other end. We must act on the day the treaty is signed, as the police will have all their resources focused on protecting the summit." Denver went looking for his father and found a pool of blood in the bathroom. He carried his father outside. Everyone now realized Moscow had been shot by the police. Berlin took my son hostage and went outside, demanding, "Send a medical team into the mint to treat one of my comrades." The negotiator demanded, "Hand over the injured robber to the police for medical treatment." Hearing this, Berlin reluctantly returned inside. Rio examined Moscow's wound, but they lacked the medical equipment to treat him. The situation became dire with the tunnel unfinished and Moscow critically injured. Things reached a breaking point when Rio declared, "It's all over." He told everyone, "Berlin and the professor are brothers. They're both North Korean. They're willing to die for this, but I'm not." Rio urged Denver, "Take your father outside to the police for treatment. It's better to be in jail and alive than to die here." Rio then went to dig the tunnel, as it was their only option. Discord erupted within the gang. Denver said, "I'll go outside with Dad," but Moscow replied, "I'd rather die than go back to prison." Tokyo told everyone, "We have only 1 day left to finish the tunnel. It's our only way out." Denver asked my son, "Please take care of my father so I can dig." The inspector, having learned the professor's true identity, was now consumed with hatred for having been used by him. The professor was extremely worried that Captain Dad knew the gang's location. If he told the police, their plan would be ruined. The professor urged, "Use the inspector to find out what's going on." Just then, the inspector called the professor. Her car had broken down, and she asked him for a ride to the hospital to visit a colleague. Negotiator Kim Min-sang told the two politicians that he would move the summit forward by a day. Once the agreement was signed, 4 trillion in aid would flow to North Korea. At that point, they would raid the mint to seize all the money. The assemblyman then went on the media to announce that the Inter-Korean summit would be held a day earlier. Everyone in the mint was unaware of this news, as all connections had been cut off. The professor drove to pick up the inspector to take her to the hospital. The police officer was also driving the inspector's car, tailing them. The inspector said, "Captain Cha, the man you saw when you stormed the Special Forces unit, is injured." The professor immediately asked, "Is he seriously injured?" The inspector replied, "He hasn't regained consciousness yet." Arriving at the hospital, Inspector Woo Jin got out of the car and invited the professor to come inside with her. The professor was delighted to hear this, unaware that the police had set up an ambush throughout the hospital. Upon entering the hospital room, the professor saw Captain Cha lying unconscious. The inspector said, "Captain Cha was chased by someone, most likely the robbers. He might have gotten hold of some crucial information of theirs." The inspector then stepped outside to talk to the doctor. Once outside, she immediately called for backup. Inside the room, the professor was about to inject Captain Cha with something. But just then, the inspector walked back in, and he stopped. The inspector told him, "The doctor said it will take a day for Captain Cha to wake up." The professor was immensely relieved. Woo Jin hugged him and, taking advantage of the moment, slipped a tracking device onto his collar. Woo Jin then saw the professor off. She said to her officer, "We have to catch his entire gang to foil their plan." The inspector and several police cars then followed the GPS signal to pursue the professor, aiming to find his hideout. They tracked him to an abandoned building. The inspector and a large number of police officers went inside to apprehend the professor and his accomplices. But upon reaching the upper floor, they found the professor's coat and the tracking device resting on a chair. The inspector was utterly surprised that the professor had once again anticipated her plan. Because about 5 minutes earlier, while the professor was driving, Seun had called to inform him that the inspector's car was heading towards their hideout. Since Seun had previously placed a tracking device on the inspector's car, the professor, now panicked, checked himself and discovered the tracking device on the back of his collar. Inspector Woo Jin called her superior, the chief, to report the situation. The chief berated her for not arresting the professor on the spot. "You are temporarily suspended," he declared. Inspector Woo Jin was furious. Meanwhile, my son was caring for Moscow when he asked her, "Why would a well-educated girl like you choose my son?" My son replied, "I've never made a decision for myself in my life. Even accepting that Seo's proposal was my parents' decision because he was powerful and influential. Since meeting Denver, I've found him to be very sincere. He might be a bit clumsy, but I've decided to follow my heart." Moscow said, "What if he hurts you later? You can't just leave a criminal like him." My son responded, "Maybe I'll regret it later, But if I choose to leave here, I'm sure I'll regret that too. Everyone in the gang was working tirelessly to dig the tunnel, as time was running out. On the other side, Berlin's men were also digging furiously. While digging, Rio and Denver heard noises coming from within the earth and rock. They shouted, "Is anyone there?" Hearing a response, they were overjoyed, realizing they were close to completing the escape tunnel. Suddenly, Moscow had a seizure and collapsed. My son ran to find Denver. As the three celebrated their imminent breakthrough, my son urgently called out, "Come to your father, quickly!" Moscow, now delirious, called out to Tokyo, "Honey, you were right. Denver's life will end up just like his father's." By the time Denver arrived, Moscow had lost consciousness, but he managed to utter his last words to his son, "You take good care of my son, you hear? If you hurt her, I'll come back and haunt you. I love you, son." Moscow looked at everyone and said, "I've dug tunnels my whole life, but I've never been this happy. You've all treated my son and me like family. Thank you." Then he revealed his real name. With that, Moscow passed away. Denver and the others wept bitterly over the loss of another member of their gang. Suspended Inspector Wu Jin, refusing to give up on the case, scrutinized the map of the area where Captain Cha was killed and the route the professor took after leaving the hospital. She deduced that the professor's hideout was likely a newly constructed shopping mall and quickly went to investigate. Inside the Mint, Denver, fighting back his grief, continued digging the remaining tunnel so he could bring his father's body out. The gang, putting aside their previous disagreements, now worked together on their escape plan. The day of the summit arrived. Outside, a large crowd dressed as the robbers protested the summit, all according to the professor's plan. The congressman ordered the chief inspector, "As soon as the agreement is signed, storm the Mint. This time, no arrests. Kill them all." He then entered the building to attend the Inter-Korean summit. Meanwhile, the professor returned to his hideout. Turning around, he saw Inspector Wu Jin standing there, gun in hand. "Are you inciting public unrest to escape in the chaos?" she asked. The professor explained that his father, a construction engineer in North Korea, had been tasked with sealing all the tunnels between North and South, but he left one open. He intended to use it to bring the professor's sick brother to South Korea for treatment, but he was arrested before he could. To raise money to free his brother, the professor's father robbed a bank and was killed. "That summit isn't about unification or cooperation," the professor said. "It's a way for the rich to get richer." "How do you know that?" Inspector Wu Jin asked. "I designed the model for them," the professor replied. "The tycoon backing your ex-husband is my old boss. Knowing their plan, I devised this heist to take 4 trillion won from them." "You used me from the beginning," Inspector Wu Jin said. "That was the plan," the professor admitted. "But then I fell for you. For real." While Wu Jin was distracted, the professor snatched her gun and fired a shot. He then descended into the tunnel and started helping the others dig. On the other side, Denver saw a light. Digging through, he found the professor. Everyone cheered and embraced upon their reunion. Denver introduced my son to the professor. The professor went back up to rejoin Berlin and the rest of the gang. Tokyo then opened the door to reveal the 4 trillion won they had printed. Everyone was ecstatic. But outside, another obstacle emerged. A mysterious force caused Captain Cha to regain consciousness. At that moment, Congressman Kim Sang-man and the North Korean official finalized the summit agreement. Now, all that remained was to storm the Mint, kill the robbers, and take the money. The congressman ordered the chief inspector to attack immediately. The chief inspector commanded the special forces to assault the Mint. Inspector Wu Jin was now the professor's captive. It turned out the shot he fired had been aimed at Wu Jin's stomach, but she was wearing a bulletproof vest under her Mint uniform. The gang moved the money down the tunnel, using the water current to speed up the transfer. Above ground, Tokyo and Rio prepared obstacles to delay the police. But looking up, they saw a helicopter overhead. A team of officers rappelled down. Tokyo and Rio fought back fiercely. An officer triggered the door release, allowing the rest of the police to enter. Denver yelled for the hostages to take cover in the tunnel. The gang then went outside to support Tokyo and Rio. Tokyo fired a barrage of bullets from her machine gun, but was then hit twice, causing her to collapse. Nairobi fired at the ceiling, causing the glass roof to shatter. The special forces are attacking the Bank of Spain in Berlin. Berlin bursts out and uses a machine gun to continue firing at the police above. Denver is in a fierce fight with a special forces officer. Just as Helsinki is about to finish off the officer, Denver stops him. It turns out to be the North Korean police officer from earlier. The officer gets up, only to be subdued by Denver. Denver then tells Helsinki to go to the main hall and help the others escape, while he stays behind and fights the North Korean officer hand to hand. Just as the officer is about to stab Denver with a knife, his girlfriend, my son, hits the officer's arm. Denver then knocks the officer unconscious. Tokyo has now regained consciousness. The gang continues to fire furiously at the police. Denver also goes outside to join the fight. Because the gang has heavy weaponry, their firepower causes the police to falter. Another special forces team enters and deploys tear gas. Everyone in the gang quickly runs down to a vault to escape. The North Korean officer leads his colleagues down to the vault that he and the hostages had dug previously. Once inside, they discover all the hostages are there, and it's just a decoy vault. The gang members are now making their way down to their real escape tunnel. Some of them then descend further to meet up with the professor. Nairobi plans to use a bomb to seal the tunnel and prevent the police from entering, but unfortunately, the bomb malfunctions and won't detonate. Above, the police begin to break down the door. Berlin tells Nairobi and Helsinki to leave. He will stay behind to hold off the police. Nairobi wants to stay and help Berlin, but Helsinki drags her away. At this moment, the inspector finally cracks the lock and goes looking for the robbers. She calls headquarters to inform her boss about the tunnel the robbers will use to escape. Captain Cha had finally arrived, joining forces with the police to apprehend the money heisting gang. Inspector Wu Jin reached the professor's hideout and descended into the secret tunnel. The police arrived and surrounded Professor Seun's lair. Upon learning that his lover, Berlin, was engaging in a deadly standoff with the police, he rushed towards him. The professor called for a truck to transport the money, but the driver informed him that the police had already surrounded their base. Berlin called the professor. "I'll stay here and fight them." The professor replied, "The police have surrounded our escape route." Berlin fired relentlessly at the police, but the professor said, "It's over." Berlin retorted, "I'll fight until the last second." When Berlin ran out of ammunition, a North Korean officer handed him a grenade. Seeing the police closing in, Sehun arrived and urged Berlin to escape. Sehun, firing continuously at the police, accidentally triggered an explosion, sealing off a section of the tunnel. Hearing the explosion, the professor assumed Berlin was dead. He threw a drawing of his father into the water and then called Assemblyman Kim Sang-man, pleading, "I'll surrender, but let my team live." At that moment, Tokyo arrived and threw the professor's phone into the water, declaring, "I don't want to see anyone else I care about die." Looking at his father's tunnel map, the professor discovered a secret escape route. He announced to the team, "The police have surrounded us, but I found another way out on the other side of the tunnel." Inspector Wu Jin descended further into the tunnel, searching. She encountered fellow officers, only to be unexpectedly arrested. Suspecting her of colluding with the robbers, Assemblyman Kim Sang-man ordered her to be brought back to their base. Meanwhile, two of Berlin's close associates planted explosives beneath the main square. Wu Jin was taken to the police station. Her ex-husband stated, "I suspect you're in league with the robbers, so you'll be investigated." Wu Jin retorted, "I know you want to kill them to cover your tracks. Don't think I don't know what you're doing." Just then, the police reported to headquarters that they had discovered a bomb under the main square. Wu Jin was dragged outside. The assemblyman refused to evacuate the square, fearing the robbers would blend in with the crowd and escape. Enraged, Captain Cha stormed outside. The police announced that it was too late to defuse the bomb. The bombs detonated, but only with small explosions. Then, inflatable pigs began to rise from beneath the square. After floating momentarily, they exploded, showering the crowd below with a rain of money. Everyone scrambled to collect the cash. The North Korean tycoon was furious that his money had been released. The hostages watching the news in the police waiting room were elated. Meanwhile, the professor and his team found a new escape route. The money-laden trucks were waiting. Captain Cha pursued Inspector Wu Jin, intercepting the police car. She told him, "I know where they're going." The professor told me about a secret tunnel between South and North Korea. help me escape." Captain Cha attacked the officers, allowing Wu Jin to drive away. He was subsequently arrested. The professor's gang hurriedly loaded the money onto a train, preparing to disappear from South Korea. Suddenly, one of Berlin's associates received a call from him and handed the phone to the professor. It turned out Berlin and Sihun had escaped through a sewer pipe, blending in with the crowd scrambling for money. The professor and his team rejoiced, relieved that Berlin and Sihun were safe. They boarded the train. Tokyo said to the professor, "The inspector might be on her way. She's very capable. Are you waiting for her?" Indeed, just as the professor was about to board the train, Inspector Wu Jin appeared, aiming her gun at him. She demanded they stop the train. "I'm taking you to court," she declared. "For what?" the professor asked. "For exposing the politician's schemes, or for deceiving you." He then boarded the train. Wu Jin watched, unable to pull the trigger, then burst into tears. The gang embarked on their journey to a secret location, successfully reaching their destination. The media and the police couldn't find any trace of them. However, their heist of over $300 million in the square made international headlines. The police began investigating how the robbers could print 4 trillion won. After examining the serial numbers on the money scattered in the square, they concluded that it was connected to the Inter-Korean Summit, intended to bail out North Korean conglomerates. Assemblyman Kim Sang-man made a public statement to clear his name. Inspector Wu Jin was subjected to a year-long investigation to determine if she had colluded with the robbers. An international lawyer offered to represent Wu Jin, stating that someone had already paid all legal fees. Wu Jin returned home and found the picture of the coastal village she and the professor had once planned to visit together. She flew there, locating the exact spot in the photograph. Searching for a nearby cafe, she was surprised to find the professor, who invited her to his own coffee shop. "Do you have another plan?" she asked. "I have a plan that will change the history of crime," the professor replied.